might be surprised to learn just how many cases there are involving UFO occupants healing people. In his 2019 book, The Healing Power of UFOs, Preston Dennett laid out 300 cases in which people claim that they were miraculously cured after an encounter with either strange lights or ETs. One might come away from this believing that the visitors, or at least some faction of them, are actually benevolent, here to assist humanity rather than harm. Recently, Albert Rosales forwarded me a case that apparently happened in 1959, one that was reported to the Mutual UFO Network. On the surface, it read like so many other such reports. A young boy claiming that his injured arm was healed after an encounter with strange non-human entities, though this one seemed a little darker than the others, and I began to question the motives behind the visitors want to heal this boy. It was 1959, Vicksburg, Mississippi. The witness, Joseph, no last name was provided, who was only 6 at the time, was with his family watching television in the living room. They had just finished supper and were relaxing with some TV before bed. Joseph was seated in the back of the room, barely paying attention to the TV. He was still feeling quite a bit of pain after earlier falling onto the wood stove. He had used his left arm to break the fall and received a nasty burn. This resulted in him being treated for his burn, either by his parents or by hospital staff. This part was not clarified in the report, and his arm was placed in a sling. While seated at the back of the room, he heard a voice speak to him. He assumed that it was one of his siblings, but after peering around the room, he noticed that they were all very much focused on the television. Then the voice spoke to him again, telling him the same thing. "Go to the back porch. I want to show you something." He looked around again, but nobody else, aside from his family members, were present in that room, so he wondered where the voice was coming from. This second time the voice was a lot more commanding and authoritative. With his interest piqued, Joseph got up and walked to the back porch. His mother kept an eye on him in case he needed some assistance. His father was also present, though he did not seem to notice him leaving the room, as he was more focused on whatever program was playing on the TV. Joseph slowly made his way towards the back porch, stepped outside, and looked around. It was very dark, and nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Sensing that whomever had called him outside might still be nearby, he replied out loud, "I don't see nothing." This is when the voice spoke to him, telling him to, quote, "look up." When he did, he observed a huge dark object hovering in the sky. They lived near some railroad tracks, and Joseph was quite familiar with locomotives, and this object looked as large or larger than a locomotive. His immediate response was to say, "Wow." Suddenly, a circle of lights around the center circumference of the craft came on, though he had trouble remembering the details of the lights for whatever reason. As he stood watching it, an upward, large, retractable door opened, and a very human-looking female with light skin, dressed in a white garment which draped to her feet, stood there, looking down at him. His initial sense was that she was disappointed in him for some reason, though he did not know why. Then she smiled. At first he only noticed her. Then when he let his eyes wander around the frame of the door, he saw a group of children of varying ages standing next to her. They were in rows of maybe 7 or 8 per row. Strangely, the children had an almost trance-like appearance. When he smiled at them, the lady was somewhat surprised, as if that behavior had been unexpected. Then she glanced at the children and back at the witness, as though she had just understood why he was smiling. He was acknowledging the children. Then she turned back to him with an intense look and made motions with her hands. And this is when Joseph realized that the burn on his arm had been healed. He felt no more pain. She made a gesture to him, a gesture that he took as her way of asking, "Have I gained your confidence yet? Do you trust me now?" This is when things took an even stranger turn. As the woman began to stare intently at Joseph, he looked back at her, and this is when he actually started to feel afraid. He felt himself slipping into a sort of trance. He could feel his heart beat faster, to the point where he became quite frightened and knew that something was wrong. He immediately turned away, breaking eye contact. When he looked back at her, he could see that she was peering down at him with a disappointing frown. He told her that he was going to get his sister. As he began to leave, the voice that spoke to him initially spoke to him by name and said, "Joe, don't go." Joseph repeated that he was going to get his sister. He went into the house and told his sister there was something he wanted to show her. She came out onto the back porch with him, and it was completely dark now. Nothing was there. Joseph never saw the craft again, although there were some less dramatic incidents before and after the sighting, which he believed in hindsight were connected. Joseph noted in his report that the craft was tilted enough and was lit well enough that he could see inside. There were other human-like entities there, adults, that he could see. They appeared to be, from what he could tell, piloting or controlling the craft and didn't acknowledge him. He also noted that he heard absolutely nothing, not even when it departed. In communicating with him, the female only used gestures. At no point did she speak to him audibly, and he was certain that the strange voice he heard, the one that coaxed him outside, was speaking to him in his mind. While he was facing the lady, the multiracial group of children were to her left. His impression was that these children, or childlike entities, were very unhappy. However, there was some other entity to her right that was out of his view that in a strange way connected to him. He could not explain it better than that, only that he felt a connection to this being. Upon entering the house, his mother asked him what had happened to his arm, since it had been healed. He told her that the lady in the sky healed it. Like I said, on the surface this reads like a lot of other healing cases, though there are aspects that are deeply concerning. It seems to me that something very, very sinister was happening that night in 1959. The witness described being drawn outside by a voice, and almost immediately he observed a craft and a seemingly normal woman who was surrounded by a group of children who appeared to be in a sort of trance. The healing of the arm seemed specifically designed to put him at ease and garner his trust, and she even gestured to him, asking him if she had indeed succeeded in doing so. This is when the witness noted that he started to become afraid, as she stared at him in such a way that he felt that he was being placed into a trance, not unlike the other children aboard the craft next to her. I do wonder what might have happened to Joseph had he not been able to break that contact. Was his heart racing out of fear, or were they, the occupants of the craft, initiating some kind of transfer to bring him aboard? Was that what his body was reacting to? Were the other children aboard the craft just like Joseph? Had they also been drawn outside into the night where they were taken from their homes? This isn't the first case I've talked about where witnesses have described seeing children on board UFOs. The Port Charlotte case, for example, the witness claims he saw numerous seemingly black-eyed children peering down at him from a craft hovering overhead. I liken the healing of his arm to a creeper in a van offering a child some candy. Her motives behind the healing were not altruistic. If anything, it was the opposite. It seems that her intention was to get his trust, place him into a trance or hypnotic state, and then take him. To where is anybody's guess. Even though the next case I'm going to discuss happened 40 years after the Vicksburg incident, it does feel like a natural extension in many ways. It also involved a small boy being coaxed out of his home by non-human entities. It was 1999. The witness, then 7, was living with his parents in an upscale neighborhood in Florida. He recalled that at that time, the community was in a state of panic after a 5-year-old boy was snatched out of his second-story window in the middle of the night. Such things didn't happen in that area, so the community reacted in shock. That panic obviously shifted to fear, and that fear was felt by us kids, and with the story on the news to back it up, it was enough to give any child nightmares. Fast forward a few months later, when the story kind of faded from the news outlets, the panic slowly faded as well. I, however, would have nightmares sometimes about someone coming into my room and taking me. My parents would always check the locks on my windows, and reassure me that I would be just fine, but the nightmares continued for some time. The witness claims that one dream stood out more than the others. He was laying in bed. His little brother's room was next to his, and his parents' room was down the hall. He had gotten out of bed and snuck military style to the living room so he could watch some late-night TV without getting caught. I had ended up falling asleep on the couch, not something I did because that obviously would blow my cover in the morning. I remember waking up at the very early stages of morning, maybe 2, 3 a.m. I turned off the TV and walked to my room. I lay down in bed, pulled the covers over my head, and I closed my eyes. Tap. I pulled my covers down instantly. Something had just tapped on my window. I go into full panic mode, but I can't bring myself to move or scream. Tap. Now I am hyperventilating, but something compelled me to pull my curtains back. I walked to the window, pulled the curtains back, and saw nothing. Before I go any further, I would like to make something clear. Growing up, I was very adventurous. This, however, was completely out of my comfort zone. Anyways, for some reason, I took my screen off my window and opened my window so that I could crawl out. Next thing I know, I am standing barefoot in my pajama bottoms in my sandy backyard. To this day, I can remember how weird I felt. The witness noted that what happened next was sort of a blur, pieces of a memory. He remembered walking down the road and seeing a house. It was very distinctive because it had been struck by lightning 3 times in the last year, and each time it had nearly burned to the ground but was somehow miraculously saved. This house was several blocks away from my house, but still in the neighborhood. I remember a child's yellow slide coming from the 2nd-story window, down to the ground floor on the outside of the house. I proceeded to walk up to the house and make my way up the slide. As I started to get closer to the top of the slide, I could hear what sounded like a family having dinner. I got to the top and peeked inside. It was a family, but they were completely white with no distinctive facial features. I can't recall what I saw them doing, but I remember thinking they were vampires. Whatever I saw them do scared me to the point of me falling down into the house. I landed on my back. The room spun for a moment. The last thing I remember was 3 of them standing over me. That was it. The alarm clock rang. It was 7:30 a.m. The witness opened his eyes and realized that it was just a dream. As he pulled his covers down to climb out of bed, he noticed immediately that his feet were filthy. He thought this odd. As he proceeded to stand up, he immediately crashed to the floor. A sharp lightning pain shot through his leg, causing him to buckle in pain. I physically could not get up. I screamed for my parents, who initially thought I was making it up to get out of going to school. My dad had noticed my screen was missing from my window and gave me a stern look of disbelief when I told him I didn't know what had happened to it. Once they realized I was in excruciating pain and I couldn't stop crying, they took me to the ER for x-rays. This is when I got really freaked out. The x-rays showed a, quote, hole punch in my femur. The doctor said he'd never seen anything like it and had absolutely no idea what could have caused it. Dumbfounded, we left the hospital with pain meds and a follow-up appointment that would end up amounting to me making a full recovery. In speaking to his parents later, the detail of the slide coming from the 2nd-story window of the home, his parents were adamant that no such slide existed and never had, though the witness was absolutely certain that he had not only seen it, but crawled up it. I specifically remember a swirly yellow-covered slide coming from the 2nd-story window on the right side of the house, all the way to the bottom out in the yard. I crawled up the slide and was looking into what appeared to be a kitchen. When I got scared, all I remember was being pulled forward into the house, like I was falling forward. To this day, I don't know if that was a dream or if I actually experienced something truly extraordinary that night. Going by what they found the next day, the dirty feet, the removed window screen, the injury, I'm gonna guess that it wasn't a dream. He started off by pointing out that a young boy, around his age, had recently been taken out of his 2nd-story window. So this already sets up that something nefarious was going on in that community, that somebody or something was snatching children in the middle of the night. The witness claims that he heard a tap on his window. Despite being afraid, he felt compelled to not only remove the screen, but actually crawl out of his window. He doesn't remember actually crawling out of his window, just that he thought about doing it, and then he was suddenly on the ground in his backyard. He vaguely remembered walking down the street and observing a specific house in his community, one that was heavily damaged by lightning. He then observed a slide which led up to the second floor window. A slide leading up to the second floor window seems a little odd. Upon crawling up that slide, he observed what to him looked like a family of pale vampires with no distinctive facial features, sitting around a table. They were doing something that frightened him. He could not recall what they were doing, only that it scared him enough that he felt he needed to get away. He then felt like he was being pulled forward into the house where they, the family of vampires, surrounded him. His next memory was waking up in his bed, where he soon discovered that during the night he had sustained a pretty serious injury to his femur. I don't believe that it was a dream. I believe that he had been drawn outside into the night by some force. The damaged house with the slide, I suspect, might not have been a house at all. Possibly the slide was actually a ramp leading into a landed craft of some type. The house and the ramp were part of a screen memory designed to normalize the situation and put the witness at ease. The family of vampires seated around the table in the kitchen probably weren't vampires, but something just as frightening. Many researchers, including John Keel and Michael Wynn being one of the big inspirations for this channel, have noted similarities between vampires of old and ETs and the Men in Black. The dark eyes, pale skin, gaunt appearance, and their unsettling demeanor. Were they responsible for his injury, or had this happened when he fell? The detail about their faces being indistinct is also another intriguing detail, as it pops up in so many cases. People can describe the visitor's height, weight, what they were wearing, but when it comes to their faces, more often than not, they have trouble recalling those details. Either it is obscured by equipment or clothing, it's too dark to see, or there's just no actual face there. Author and researcher Zelia Edgar over at the Just Another Tinfoil Hat podcast produced an amazing video on the topic of faceless entities that I highly recommend you go watch. Probably the one aspect of the case that makes it truly creepy, well, creepier than seeing a family of vampires in an old house at 3 a.m., is the fact that another kid had apparently gone missing just a few months earlier in a similar fashion. This to me speaks to the truly sinister nature of at least some of these beings. The idea of somebody coming into your house and taking your child in the middle of the night is something straight out of our worst nightmares. And the idea that it could be happening, and some of those responsible might not be of this world, is even more unsettling.